Well, thanks everyone for joining this conversation. So, we're talking here about business exits or business transitions. And I was doing a little bit of research on this and I came across some statistics. McKinsey estimates that roughly 6 million small and mid-sized U.S. businesses, which represents about $5 trillion in value, will face an ownership transition between now and 2035. More than half of small business owners are now over 55, and 1 in 4 are over 65. So there's going to be a great ownership transfer, and where there will be a flood of similar businesses available, chasing after a limited pool of qualified buyers and capital. So in your experience, what are some of the challenges that business owners are facing, and what are the things that they can be doing to prepare for that inevitable exit that happens sooner or later, voluntarily or involuntarily?
My name is Kristin Young, and I'm a M&A advisor with Transworld Business Advisors. And what we do is we look at it kind of through the framework of like, there's 4 different things that you want to make sure that a business is ready for, right? You want to make sure that they are ready operationally. Okay. You want to make sure that they have the right SOPs in place. You want to make sure that their operations are running really efficiently. You want to make sure that they're financially, and Amanda can probably speak a little bit more to that one in particular too. You want to make sure that their management and their teams are ready as well, too, that they have a well-structured teams, that the scope is clear around everything. And you want to make sure that they're legally ready for it, too, right? Do they have everything in place that they need to in order to exit this? And so we kind of look at it through those 4 basic frameworks. I don't know if anybody has any other thoughts on that, too.
Well, just to follow up on, first of all, this is Joe Orlando with Exit Strategies Group. I run the business valuation practice of an M&A advisory firm. And so I'm there sort of at the benchmark point where a company identifies what it's worth. And that's when Ryan and Amanda come in to try to identify how to generate value so that either my team or Kristin's team can come in and facilitate the sale. And so one of the things, though, that Kristin and I have presented at a Provisors meeting together, and she had a terrific slide on the doors that are available to a business owner, and I think it resonates, and it's probably a good thing to start that conversation off with, those 2 doors, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, and there's actually a number of doors, right? Like so when we're looking at that, what Joe is referring to is like, what is the mindset of the seller, right? Start with the mindset. No matter what, a seller has to be ready to exit. It's going to happen no matter what. Like, you can't help it. Like, your business something's going to happen. You're going to exit. And it's going to be for a number of different reasons, right? It's number one, you're going to sell it and you're going to get the business ready to sell, which I think is like the target goal of everybody here. You are going to give it to someone, like you're going to give it to your kids. Like a lot of people, especially like you mentioned this earlier, Dave, we're looking at what we lovingly call the silver tsunami, right? All these people are getting ready to exit. Why are you exiting? You might want to give it to your kids. I hear that a lot. A lot of times your kids don't want it too. Be ready for that, right? You sell it, you give it to your kids. You might have to close your doors. If your business is not ready to sell and you can't find a buyer for it, you have to be ready and prepared to close your doors, or you might die, right? And you have to be ready for that too. Like one of those things is going to happen. You're going to exit. Which one do you want to be in? So get your mindset right first. Do you want to sell it? Do you want to give it to your kids? Like usually those are one of the 2 reasons. Maybe you want to close it. I don't know, but get it ready for this. Is that what you were referring to, Joe? Or those kind of 4 exit
mindsets? There was a take home that you had with 2 doors, but I think that was, I think do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. What was that?
Yeah, no, the only one I could think of.
Yeah, you had a slide with it. Anyway, that's exactly what it was talking about, that there are definitely options, but there's really beyond that, you can sell it to your employees, you can fund an ESOP and let the company, pay for that equity and debt with tax benefits. And, but there are obviously ways to do it. I'm focused on what that value may be at the beginning and how it can be, and what I find, Dave, in terms of nuggets of value that can be invested in or taken advantage of. So, for example, if they're paying, I don't know, for $250,000 in insurance payments, maybe they want to think of a captive. Maybe they want to actually, put that or be part of a captive so that they can generate equity instead of just an expense. Are there expenses that are out there that are not operating that they can, walk away from or wean themselves off of in terms of using that corporate account card for, buying Costco, goods. And so there's a lot of different ways. I definitely have opinions on this on the buyer pool, but I'll let everybody else sort of talk before I sort of mention that. But yeah, there are a lot of ways to exit, and I think anybody, business owners need to understand what those options are and try to identify what those scenarios look like as an end game.
I think the conversation really has to start before that too, right? There's always going to be an exit of some sort, but thinking about it 3 to 5 years before you actually want it to happen, I think is the most important part, especially from the financial side, the accounting side, making sure that you have, stable revenue, stable EBITDA, make sure that your chart of accounts makes sense to the buyer and pull out certain things that they're going to poke holes at and really fix up the accounting piece and the financial view of the company. But that takes time. You can't do that overnight, right? The value isn't there. You can't go back and restate things. So it's really about building that view in the beginning, or at least, 3 to 5 years before you want to go, so that it looks ready for the next person to step in and it can really show the value of the company that you've built.
Yeah, that's hard to sell a business when you restate or normalize the earnings. It's hard to sell that to a buyer.
So from a marketing standpoint, there's 4 different pillars that can support a higher valuation. One is customer profitability. So what customers buy and the mix of things they buy and how often they buy and how long they buy are all feed into the relative profitability of customers. And what you want to do is analyze your customers and find the most profitable ones and certainly retain those and look for more like that. And that increases your customer profitability. The second one is customer diversity. It's really hard, and that's a big risk factor for a buyer. So the more diversity you can get among your customer base across industries, across different company sizes, different segments, different regions, all of those play into reducing risk and increasing the value. The third is putting a system in place that drives growth without the owner. So that's a more systematic approach to marketing. And the fourth one related to that is extracting the owner from the day-to-day involvement in marketing decisions, because every business needs a growth engine. And a lot of times, if you take the owner out of the business, the growth engine goes with them and therefore much of the value. So if you can build that growth engine that runs systematically without the owner and that doesn't have a lot of owner involvement, it increases the value.
Yeah, and another thing to think about as leadership teams are focused and owners are focused on growth is also holding on to the money you have. And I like to call it cost optimization, but looking at all the things that you're spending money on, if you're overspending and your costs are a lot higher than they need to be, that's going to drag the valuation way down. Profit consists of 2 things. It's the money you bring in and the money you hold on to, what you're not spending, right? And so there's a lot of businesses, they have money leaking out through all different areas they don't even realize. And so looking at a lot of those costs, I know Joe mentioned insurance, but think through everything a business buys. Shipping, you've got packaging, logistics, office supplies, cleaning services, everything. There's all these different costs. And, I've seen time and time again where businesses overpay because they don't know, or they don't have the time to look into these costs and expenses. So that's something else definitely to consider that's going to have a big impact on the EBITDA and then the valuation of the business. Yeah.
And that valuation, depends on several things, but all other things being equal, those cash flows have to be discounted back to today. And if there's risk, like you mentioned, Dave, in terms of key person risk, in terms of customer concentration risk, in terms of supply chain risk, that's just going to lower the value, because it's a simple, increase the risk, lower the value, all other things being considered when you're looking at it from an income approach. A market approach, when you're applying a multiple, those multiples are going to be higher for higher margin businesses, and they're going to be a direct double positive whammy in terms of increasing value. You're increasing your operating metric, and then you're exceeding median in terms of going towards a higher multiple, and you're going to get a significant increase in value.
Yeah, the key person part brings up a point for me too, making sure that you're selling your business where you can step away from it, right? Dave, you talked about this from a marketing perspective, but from an operations perspective, from a financials perspective, if you can't step away from your business for 2 weeks, a month, and everything run like you were there, you weren't there, you're not really selling a business. You're selling a business that really relies on you. And that's a different valuation. That's a different price that people are willing to pay for those two types of businesses. So I think that's a really important distinction to make, is the key person. If you're the key person holding all the plates up, you're not really selling a business. At some point, you're selling a job, and that's not necessarily what people are willing to pay high dollar for. Building those systems within your company, like I said, 3 to 5 years before, to make sure everything can run, and you can go to Mexico for a week or for a month and no one knows the difference and things are still moving. That's when you really got something that's worth a value to go retire on, or whatever that looks like.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think
another
that's
thing, you talk about key person, not certainly the owner is a key person, but also key person insurance is important. Things happen to other people as well, and that's another risk factor. So it's not necessarily a matter. And then you mentioned in insurance, you mentioned capture, I think you said. Is that what you said?
Oh yeah. Well, I was saying there's a captive option,
Captive
meaning
option. What does that mean?
You're just self-insuring yourself.
Okay.
You're building an entity that is identifying what that payment may be in terms of risk, and you're putting it into a captive entity that effectively turns that expense into equity. But it makes you 100% responsible for the captive paying off any insurance claim. I think,
Gotcha.
Brian, you know a little bit more about that based on your operating expense background.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the areas that can be looked at. There's a lot of things, a lot more than I ever really knew that you can do with insurance. The employee benefit insurance. There's other ones, and way too often companies pay. They're conditioned to just say, oh, yeah, insurance costs are going up 5, 10, 15% every year, and they just kind of accept that and go. We'll look at insurance, and I'd say 98% of the time we'll find 20% or more in savings, whether it's creatively structured, like Joe was talking about, with a captive or self-insured solution. But there's a lot of other and really innovative insurance options out there, and it's a lot of times maybe the agent or the broker doesn't know, and so you need to find someone that's aware of all these and can let you know what the pros and cons are. That's why I talk about cost optimization rather than just cutting cost, right? Because cutting costs, you might get rid of things that devalue the business, right? Where you're creating more risk. You want to pay a better price, but for better options, better coverage, a lower deductible for your employees. Anyway, all these things. And so you want, for all of these different cost categories, it's ideal if you can bring someone in that has expertise in these different areas that can help find those options.
Well, I want to talk about that a little bit further, because it seems to me that a common trap is it's sort of momentum, and we all do this. We're human beings. We get into habits. Things have worked, and they don't sort of get reevaluated. So maybe anyone have any comments about that objective third party and the value of them, of the value of an objective third party coming in and taking a fresh look at a business?
Yeah, I've got a great story that kind of illustrates this. We were working with a client at one time and looking at their shipping costs, and in looking at it, they're like, oh yeah, shipping's fine. Our packages get delivered on time where they need to go. Talk to the shipping manager, asking them about their vendor that provides all the shipping, and they're like, oh yeah, these guys are great. We're probably staying with them for life. They're, everything's always on time, and they bring us donuts every Friday. And it's like, okay, awesome. So there's nobody looking and saying, hey, are we actually paying the right amount? So we got looking at it and found this vendor was overcharging our client by $1 million a year on their shipping costs. And nobody was looking at it because, again, the shipping team was happy. Everything was, it was just business as normal and things were going well. And when they found this and brought it up, obviously they were able to find a new vendor, save the $1 million a year. And they even worked into the new contract that the new vendor would bring donuts to the team every Friday. So they got to keep their donuts. But, so it's a great example of things that, hey, it's just how things go, right? And nobody's really looking at it because there's not really a big problem. And so nobody takes the time to go in and dig into things. And yet there's a huge savings there, potential. And we find that in, all kinds of different areas and different categories of the business. Insurance is another great example where, hey, it's just, that's what we have. We just renew every year, and we just expect it's going to, if it stays flat, we're thrilled, but we're expecting a small increase just year over year. And that's not really the case. It doesn't need to be. Just when you don't have anybody looking at it or anyone really paying attention to it, that tends to happen.
I think people overestimate the switching costs.
Yeah.
And, all you need to do is I have T-Mobile, and if I say, hey, AT&T is giving me this rate, I automatically get put into a different line that is going to try to win me back. But the switching cost is as easy as that. I think the phone industry really figured that out and focused on that and even advertised towards it. So, Dave, I'm not sure if you see that as a key separator in terms of brand differentiation, but I think that switching costs are not necessarily understood or compared.
Mm-hmm.
But
well, from a marketing standpoint, so in terms of kind of looking at and scrutinizing assumptions, a lot of times businesses make assumptions about why customers buy from them, and it's only when you actually talk to customers and ask them why they buy that you actually find out the real answer, and that makes a tremendous difference in terms of effective communication when you can speak to your customer in terms that they understand. An example of this, I was working for a luxury dog hotel franchise, boarding and daycare for dogs, and the owners thought it was all about luxury, and they had chandeliers and dog TV and leather couches and all that stuff, which was great. It was fun. But we asked customers why did they choose them, and they said, well, my dog comes home tired and happy, the staff loves my dog, and my dog loves the staff, and the place is immaculate. So luxury was like not even the top 10 in terms of reasons to purchase. And so when we shifted the marketing branding around those three things, and it made the communication much more effective. Just another example of sort of scrutinizing what's going on. What are some of the what's some of the resistance that you guys run into, like, to preparing for exit? What are some of the things that keep people from doing what they know they need to be doing?
Yeah, I'm going to touch on that. I'm going to bring up what Amanda brought up earlier. One of the biggest issues that we have is getting owners to get their claws out of the business, right? And I use the same analogy that Amanda does, but I say you better be able to walk away for 60 days and your business better not go 60 days. Then you have a sellable business. Make sure that your marketing is operating without you. Make sure your operations can operate without you. Make sure your financials can operate without you. Though if you can do those key three things and trying to get the owner to understand that, and a lot of time it's personal, right? They want to be involved. They have trouble letting go of it. And so then it's kind of delving one layer deeper and asking the owner, like, what do you want to do? And getting their mindset a little bit different, right? You stop and you say, what do you want to do when you exit? Maybe they actually want to stay involved in the business, right? Which would set up a different type of sale for it, right? Maybe it becomes an ESOP and a slow exit in some way, shape, or form. And we would get their business in shape a different way. Maybe it's they have a loved one who is very sick right now and they need to go like that. Then we would prepare the business a little bit differently. We would price it a little bit differently, right? But it's really getting the owner to understand what they want to do, right? What their timeline is, and that they don't need to be involved in the business. They have to be able to step away in order to create value for it. Those are kind of the three ones, and they all relate to the kind of the owner mindset. Can you get out of the business and let yourself get out of it? And what do you want to do afterwards?
Any other thoughts on mindset or kind of getting past the internal barriers to thinking about an exit?
I have two thoughts. Go ahead, Amanda.
I was going to say, I think bringing someone to the table with you helps a lot as well. We jump in and kind of help the data room from the back end as far as with financials and making sure that we can put together all the information that the buyer is going to need. But we also sit at the table with you to help you get the best dollar you can for the business. And I think having someone who's been there, done that is a really important piece to making sure you're maximizing your value and maximizing your return for this investment that you've built. So I think that's one of the things to think about too, is bring in your partners, bring in your people that you know you can depend on, and make sure you're getting good advice as far as that goes.
Good point.
And I was just going to bring up 2 points, and I wrote them down so I didn't forget them. One is, an ROI that I think business owners fail to understand, and that is that they will get a much higher ROI by spending money to bring someone like Amanda or Ryan in as opposed to doing it themselves. Now they know the business and they probably could get to that point, but they don't put any value on their time. And that's their investment. And they could be much more productive running the business than thinking about all this stuff. And I think those owners are the ones that can easily be extracted by seeing the value of third parties coming in. The other is market timing. And I think, owners want to sell at the absolute high and they want to buy at the absolute low. And if you ever bought stock on the stock exchange, that's virtually impossible unless you have some type of magic 8-ball that tells you when to buy and sell. But the difficulty I've seen with the situation I'm currently working on is exactly what Kristin said. The owner wanted to sell the business, but said 2 or 3 years ago that I want to wait 2 or 3 years. They didn't do any preparation. Their books were manageable, but they were significantly outdated. I kidded to Ryan and Amanda when we had breakfast the other day that they had a fax machine in their office. I don't remember the last time I saw a fax machine. And so what happened was, unfortunately, his wife got diagnosed with Parkinson's, and so he said, "I need to take care of her." And so what ended up happening was we got initial indications of value at 25 million, and because he took his eye off the ball for obvious reasons, the purchase price now is $12 million. And his point is, well, I'm losing all this money, and I'm saying, well, you took all that money out of the business. He took 20 million out of the business in distributions over the last 5 years. I said, your business would be worth $40 million if you'd reinvested it in systems and operations and in a level of management that, that can take over the business when you leave. And so, I think that, I think failure to understand those basic concepts, and it's hard to explain those concepts to a business owner because it sounds like it's patronizing and they should know that. But it's like telling a doctor he needs to go in and get his, get his teeth checked because, he has a toothache.
What's interesting is it kind of goes back to what Kristin was saying. If you're withdrawing capital from the business, you're essentially harvesting it yourself as opposed to wanting to get value out of selling it. And that's perfectly, that's okay if that's what you want to do. It's a matter of being clear about what you want to do and how you want to extract the value out of your business. I mean,
it's a simple discounted cash flow analysis. If you put it in Microsoft Excel and you say what's the present value, there's an input that is for distributions and payouts. And if you put a number in there, that discounted cash flow is going to be significantly less because you're basically taking money out of the business. And so, that terminal value, I think, is something people don't necessarily understand if they, take money out of the business and don't reinvest it back into the business.
Terminal value, explain that.
Well, it's just from a cash flow perspective, that 3 to 5 years that I was talking about.
Okay.
If you got a 3 to 5 year plan, I think about it from a financial modeling perspective as, each year of cash flow and then a terminal value at the end of that 5 years in terms of what you sell the business for. And so you're discounting everything back to today based on a discount rate. And that discount rate involves, a buildup of risk-free rate and equity premiums and size premiums. And when I say premium, I don't mean it's positive, it's negative. You're adding to a risk, so your value is going down. And so if you get a discount rate of 20 versus 25%, that 20% discount rate is less risky than 25. The cash flows are going to be worth less when someone who invests today is going to require 25% return instead of 20%.
How often do you think, Joe, someone should go through the exercise of valuing their business?
I mean, I obviously have bias, but but I'm also very honest with my clients. I think that if they are in an active process of selling their business, they should probably do it every quarter. And they should have a strategic discussion at the end of every quarter to figure out what they did right, what they did wrong. And it could be every 6 months. But the IRS says if you do a valuation for a year and there's no material change in the business, that valuation is still fresh. And so that's for option pricing. That's for, I use that level of compliance all the time when people ask, should I update my valuation? But if you're actively trying to grow the business and generate value, then by definition, there should be a material change at least every 6 months in the business. You get a new client, you lose a client, however it works out. So yeah, I would say every 6 months is probably it, and I wouldn't charge the same amount. The first one would be more expensive because it's building the model and getting it ready, but the updates would certainly be less expensive. And we're looking at subscription models that allow us to do 3 or 4 valuations a year whenever they need one, and pay on a monthly basis as opposed to a fixed cost basis.
Amanda,
Yeah,
from a financial standpoint, if you come into a business, kind of look at the state of things, what do you look for in terms of financial practices that you want to see in a business that's
Sure.
optimizing its value?
From the kind of administration side of the accounting department, I would make sure that their profit and loss statement and their balance sheet look correct, right? We don't have negative assets. We don't have, a chart of accounts that's really long and you can't really understand what the business is doing and where they're spending their money. So I think that a lot of smaller businesses get used to categorizing things very, differently. They make a lot of categories in their chart of accounts, and it makes it hard to understand what the business is doing and where their money's going. So I would definitely standardize their chart of accounts, standardize their reporting, and start to look at the trends as far as, what their revenue looks like over the last 3 to 5 years and chart it all out to make sure that it's pretty consistent. I would do that also with their profit and their EBITDA to make sure that everything's pretty consistent and they've got a really solid operating system. If you have got one year that's a big spike in the middle, they're going to start asking questions, or one year that's a really drop as far as any of those numbers go, they're going to start poking at you and wondering why those things happen and start to do their risk assessment. The buyer's going to start, checking for risk assessment to see, is this business consistent and reliable, and to create that type of cash flow that they've seen in other years. So I think just looking at the trends over the years is really important. Also making sure that you don't have a ton of personal expenses weaved in the business expense, right? The rule is to keep them separate, but there are times where we're pulling money out of our business to fund whatever we've got going in our personal lives. And that really starts to create holes for the buyer to poke in and figure out where that money's going and if that's money's being reinvested, kind of like what we spoke about earlier. So those are the things that I would look at, really making sure that you're presenting the right picture to the buyer and it's useful business information that's coming out of your financial reports.
Good. I think from a marketing standpoint, I think there's a framework we like to use, which has 6 elements to it. One is, do you have a clear goal for marketing? What does marketing need to accomplish over a 2-year, 3-year period? Do you understand your buyer? I talked a little about that a little earlier. That's critical in terms of developing messaging. Do you have a clear brand that's different than your competitors in a way that's easy to communicate? Do you understand how sales and marketing work together? A lot of businesses have sales and marketing that are kind of, they don't talk. They're pointing fingers. That they really need to be aligned well. And you need to have a cadence for planning where you're doing annual planning, quarterly planning. You know what your marketing plan is. You know how you're going to measure your marketing. You have a good scorecard, and you're looking at that on a weekly basis. And then finally, you're investing where your marketing is paying off. So this requires some investment in systems so you can understand which of your marketing investments are providing you a return. And you're constantly looking at moving the investment from the things that are providing a low return to the things that are providing a higher return. And that's how you systematically get to where you need to get to. Any other best practices?
Yeah, I was gonna mention, so we'll do similar to looking at that, we'll do a cost intelligence analysis where we'll look at all the expenses, where are those going, right? Understanding who are all the vendors by category. Are there some that you're over reliant on that create, supply chain risk? Are there others where you're spending money all over the place? You're running down to 7-Eleven every time instead of going to the directly to the manufacturer. Anyway, those kind of things, and to really understand what is the supply chain. It's one of the ways we get in and start to identify and optimize those costs, but it also can identify some of those potential risk areas, on the vendor side. Just like you don't want to be reliant on a couple of customers. It's the same thing with supply chain. You want to make sure that your key vendors and providers are still going to be there. That, whether there's, the contracts are not taking advantage of you. You're not paying more than you need to, and those kind of things. And so that's always useful to do. I mean, really anytime, but definitely as you're getting ready for a sale, you don't want to have some of that, supply chain risk or overspend.
Kristin and I often see buyers come in and hire a third party to do what's called a quality of earnings. And effectively what they're doing is a risk assessment. And they're trying to identify holes, like Amanda said, whether it's personal expenses, whether it's chart of accounts, and their goal is to to mitigate risk or identify it. And so, the best that we can do is make sure that they have as much information as possible that they need in order to do that. And Amanda made a point before saying, we can help the company by focusing on that virtual data room that those firms are going to pull that information from, making sure it has complete information, making sure, that we have support, making sure there is as much information there as possible. And the easiest way to do that is to start from when you decide you want to sell in 2 to 3 years. Just open up a folder and say, these are the files that I need to put in there. And, it will certainly help the banker, and it will certainly help the poor controller who has to, be put in a situation where he or she needs to collect all this data in short time while closing the books every month.
So I was going to bring up a topic that everyone wants to talk about these days, which is artificial intelligence. So how do people start to think about that? Joe, how are buyers looking at that? What are they looking for? Amanda, from a financial standpoint, what sort of, systems and compliance is another issue. Risk of there's copyright risk, there's all kinds of things. So what when people are thinking about selling, what do they need to be thinking about in terms of AI adoption?
Well, from my perspective, they can get the answer of what their business is worth, by just typing in their URL and saying, what is this business worth? I mean, I blew the mind of a wine owner when we had a meeting and he hadn't heard of Claude. I said, put the name of your winery and say how much do you think it's worth? And he did, and he said except for a lease agreement that they had with a vineyard, it was almost spot on. And so the question is, that was easily, measurable, or you could easily determine whether it was right or wrong. But when you can't, you're taking a risk. I mean, whether it's hallucination, whether it's focusing on the wrong thing, in terms of looking at market multiples or whatever. But I use AI as a check and balance. I just sent a model to Claude and said, I'm valuing this solar company. I'm doing something wrong because the two methods are coming out significantly different. What am I missing? And that's my peer review, especially when you have, not many peers around you that are working with you.
Okay.
I think also we should look at it from a risk perspective as a business and say, hey, what am I doing that AI could replace right now, right? So is there a risk in one of my revenue streams around AI replacing that? Because that will devalue your business too, right? So think about it like, hey, think about everything that you could do. And then also look at it from an efficiency perspective, right? Like Ryan has talked about before too. What are we doing that we could reduce our costs and use AI for instead? So those are the two things that we kind of look at.
Yeah, I think from a marketing standpoint, what our approach is to make sure that you have a strategy that you're training AI on, and then AI can dramatically reduce the cost of execution. And in marketing, it's just, you don't hire a copywriter anymore. You train Claude well, and you get Claude to do a lot of your copy. Now, I'm not saying that's the end result. You still have to run it. You have to have the human in the loop. But I think there are a lot of the execution in marketing is the cost is dropping dramatically, quickly.
Yeah, but that cost of AI is going to go up. I mean, that at some point in time, it's not going to be paying, salaries. It's going to be paying a monthly AI bill.
Yeah.
I think that for us, AI is not hiring that marginal person, needing a person and a half, and giving the person that's there the tools get that half, and it delays or avoids that extra hire. And I think that's the benefit we see as a tool in our toolbox.
Any other words of wisdom anybody wants to share before we wrap this up?
I had a topic that I'd like to hear from all three people on that it was almost like an epiphany. When I was talking to a kid who just graduated college with an accounting degree, he was working at an accounting firm as a temp, and he was trying to figure out what he wanted to do. And he said, look, I think I'm going to quit and try to figure out what I want to do. Paternally, I told him, don't do that. You can do it side by side. But what I said surprised me because it made sense, and I didn't believe it came out of my mouth when I said it. And that is that someone at that age is looking to build equity in a house. They can't afford to buy a house. I said, why not build equity in a business? As a young buyer, tell someone that's 3 to 5 years away from selling their business, hey, I want to buy your business. I'll pay you a salary and we can figure out a value. But from an equity perspective, building equity in a business is not only easier, it's exponential, and or it can be. And that you can't get that multiple of value from a house. You just can't do it unless you put significant investment in it. And then, but if you're, I just think that there is a pool of buyers out there that we're not looking at that are young. They want to build equity in something. And if they can be matched with an aging population that has children that aren't interested in the business, they are ideal buyers for their businesses. They're ideal for this economy in terms of transferring wealth. And it's going to take hard work, but there are individuals out there. Trust me, I get emails all the time from people who want to be in investment banking. But if I believe there is a situation, Kristin, you may know about MBA students who effectively, will go to a business and say, hey, look, I'm going to put together a plan, for a year. You hire me for a year, and then, I'm going to figure out how to sell your business or buy your business. And it's smart. I wish I had thought about that when I was graduating, from grad school.
Yeah, it's definitely another. Oh, go ahead, Kristin. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I absolutely love that model, and I'm glad you brought that up, Joe. And typically that applies to a little bit more on the Main Street small business side. It's not going to be your $20 million businesses probably.
No, and it shouldn't be.
But for anyone coming out, I've seen that happen a number of times, and the best buyers I found are employees around there because they already know the business. They have ideas about how they can make it better. There's trust. We didn't really touch on the trust topic, but being able to trust what is going on is one of the hardest things about selling a business. Transparency, right? That doesn't exist when you get a young person with a ton of energy coming in who knows the business and is passionate about it, already knows the people. So that's my favorite.
That idea. I was just talking to a 20-year-old over the last week or so, and he was kind of expressing the angst that they're all feeling about, I'm never going to get the American dream. I can't afford a house. I can't, but you maybe you can afford a business and you can build that equity in a different way.
You totally can.
Yeah.
I mean, if the alternative is shutting your doors, you can afford a business.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it solves that job versus business conversation that we were having earlier. If you really are kind of the glue that holds your business together, hire someone that can come and stand next to you and teach them the ways and pass that business on to them, right? Just because you're in that position doesn't mean you need to close your doors. There's so many tradesmen and those types of businesses that really are the bread and butter and the glue that holds the business together. But there are a ton of young, this next generation coming up that they want to be taught those things. And so, think about that before you decide to close your doors, for sure.
Yeah, and Portland's a perfect city with all its artisans that are basically self-employed and doing terrific things. And the younger people also know how to market that better than I do. I don't think I've seen a TikTok video. I haven't, I'm not active on social media, but it's amazing what people can do to influence buyers through current systems that I'm just not an expert at.
No, a great point is that, start looking for the who's going to buy your business. Start looking now, who could be out there.
Don't exclude anybody.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's not your kid, it may be your kid's buddy or fraternity brother or, his girlfriend's, sister. I mean, and I think that younger people need to get to that point where they say, why not me? Why can't I buy this?
Yeah.
So,
Great.
Another area to look at things like that are like internship programs. I'm working with various schools around the area to help kind of build some of those up. But there's a lot of students who need internships, both paid and unpaid, and it's a great way to get people in the door and kind of, it's almost that matchmaking, but with very low risk. It might start off for a couple months because they need an internship for a class, but it can build on that. It can, they get in and try things out, and it's, hey, they like it. Okay, now you can, build on. Anyway, there's ways out there to do it for, really easily and for almost no cost. If you want to look at that, and kind of plant some of those seeds.
And I think one of the biggest things right now to be thinking about for owners is when should I start thinking about this, right? And that's now. It doesn't matter whether you are 5 years out, whether you are 10 years out. The number one problem that we run into is that person who comes up and says, I want to sell my business. What's it worth? I want to sell it tomorrow. And we're like, listen, you've got to prep. Like, you've got to take 3 to 5 years. And you should be looking at it, especially from a valuations perspective, across the entire life cycle of your business, right? Don't wait until the last minute, because those people who wait till the last minute to be like, what's my business worth? I want to sell it tomorrow, are the ones who never get the value that they should on their business, because they didn't bring the third parties along that they needed to get in the door. They didn't look at the valuation on a regular basis. They didn't bring in the person who might want a job to buy their business, right? Think about it now. Doesn't matter where you are. Think about it now.
That's a great way to wrap this up. Well, thank you all for playing and joining in and sharing your expertise and your perspectives. And we'll be back with you with the content when it's edited and
Okay.
but I hope you guys had a good time and you found value.